Good afternoon, and welcome to the retake of the April 23rd AIIM Florida Chapter meeting. The topic being create a Records and Information Program dashboard, and that was presented by me, B. John Masters. Unfortunately, for some reason, the record function did not work correctly, and the recording that was promised was not available. So I'm going to redo the presentation. It will obviously lack the interaction that we had yesterday, so maybe a little bit more dry, but please excuse that technical glitch, and hopefully we'll be able to do better this time. So the idea here is that people need a well-established and functioning records and information management program. The question becomes, how do you evaluate that program and judge it? The reason you need that program is poor records and information management is costly. And as professionals in the field, you all are well aware of this. These are just some of the many costs that businesses incur when records and information are not properly managed. The idea of this program is to give you some ideas about how you might evaluate your own program based on my experience as a records manager and then as a consultant helping other organizations evaluate theirs. The idea is that when you create an objective measurement of performance, it helps with a number of things. First, it establishes a baseline. If it's a repeatable sort of standardized evaluation, you can see how you're performing year over year, quarter over quarter, whatever the frequency might be. And your baseline becomes a key performance indicator. This can help you sell records management internally and get that ever so important management support. Managers, as we all know, like to see objective numbers. And so if you can provide that and that those are based on industry standards, it gives you a lot more credibility as you go to them and ask for the funding for your priorities. And having this evaluation of your program that can be broken down by the various elements of a program, it can help you set your priorities in sort of a logical way. That brings up an interesting point. The president of the local chapter had asked me to do this, and I had agreed. And then he called back just a few days before the presentation and said, hey, can you split it into two presentations? And so we're going to do that. And the next presentation will be, I believe, on May the 7th. You'll get information about that. And there we'll actually go through the exercise of establishing some initiatives based on an evaluation and then how to prioritize those. And as you all know, metrics, any kind of metrics, is a key element of information governance, the implementation model that's published by AIIM. So there are tools available to you. ARMA has standards, and of course the principles, formerly known as the Generally Accepted Record Keeping Practices, GARP, which we don't use anymore. I mean, we still use the principles, just not the word. Then, of course, ANSI has guidance on auditing for records and information management compliance, and there is the ISO standard for records management. And so the idea is here are available tools that you can use, industry standards that give credibility to the evaluation that you may be presenting to your management. So the ideas here are that you create, you need a strategy, right? And so you use, in this case, some of those industry standards to help you develop a methodology to evaluate your records. And in this situation, I built it such that you could evaluate the organization on how it managed both paper and electronic records independently, because some organizations are doing much better in one than the other. And again, it just helps you set priorities where they need to be. That evaluation is based on reviewing existing policies, training, guidance products, and other governance considerations. You can either do the evaluation yourself as the records professional for the organization, or you can do it on a business unit by business unit method, where you then compile the findings from the various business units, and then you get the results from that. You have coming out of that should be recommendations for improving in areas where you might be deficient, and a recommended implementation timeline. And then again, this is something you are just continuously doing in effect. You may do the evaluation again, as I mentioned, annually, and see how the previous recommendations, if they were carried through, those projects, if they had an impact or not, and how much. And now that you've completed those, what are the next things on the priority list? What has changed in the organization? That sort of thing. So I built the one that I used from three instruments: the ARMA principles, the ISO standard, and because it was initially used for a couple of federal government applications, a NARA self-evaluation. And here I want to stop and tell a little bit of a story of how this methodology came into being and why. I was called in to help a large federal department, cabinet level department, develop a long-term strategy for improved electronic records management. They had had some issues at that time, some very publicly embarrassing issues around records management. They had an outstanding records manager, however, who had worked very hard and brought the organization a very long way in a short period of time, and ran a very tight ship. And she knew all of the things that they needed to do. But you know, you're never a prophet in your own land, and she recognized that and knew that by bringing in a consultant, it could get a little higher level of attention. And of course, I wanted to contribute to that by applying industry standards. So that would make my evaluation and recommendations as objective as they could possibly be, and sort of put them in, give them that imprimatur of being the industry standards that they were based on, so that it would be a little harder for her superiors to kind of push back on what those recommendations are. So it came from those three instruments. Now, the NARA instrument is just a very good instrument for assessing a program, regardless of whether it's a federal program or not. Just a very few changes have been made to it such, just simply to change some of the wording, and it's still very applicable whether you're a commercial entity or a state and local government, just as easily as a federal agency. So I decided to start with the 7 primary criteria that are in the ISO standard, and then I mapped the other sections of the ARMA principles and this NARA self-evaluation to those 7 criteria. And so for policies and procedures, we mapped the principles related to transparency, and then records creation and record keeping out of the self-evaluation instrument. For program structure, I mapped accountability from the principles, and program management from the self-evaluation. From classification plan effectiveness, we mapped compliance from the principles, and records disposition and records schedule development from the self-evaluation. And then from security and protection, we mapped protection and vital records. And then from active program effectiveness, we mapped in availability and retention from the principles, and maintenance of special records from the self-evaluation. For the inactive program effectiveness, we mapped in disposition and, of course, records disposition and disposition schedule implementation. And then monitoring and training, we mapped from the principles, the section on integrity, and program management from the self-evaluation. Here's just sort of a more comprehensive eye chart view of that. So in getting started on this, it needs to be as simple as you can make it while being comprehensive. It's sort of a fine line to walk, admittedly, but I think our instrument accomplishes it. You want it to be comprehensive enough to be valid, and to again I come back to conveying that sense of objectivity to it. And as I noted, because it can be used to establish performance indicators, it should be reusable over time. There are all sorts of tools that you could use if you can develop a mechanism to collect the information in some sort of scoring mechanism. You can plug it into Tableau and some other free tools that will let you massage data, but we're going to keep it real simple and just use Excel for this. And to give you an idea, just right up front, this is sort of what it looks like when you would open up the Excel spreadsheet. And you can see there are a number of tabs at the bottom. The ones you see there correspond to those ISO criteria. I color code them because that's just kind of that's the way I think sometimes, and we try to be consistent with that. And then for each of the 7 criteria, I developed a scoring mechanism, right? So you have to have that, and it's consistent. It's 0 to 5 for each of the criteria, as you see here, and similar. So it keeps it sort of simple, I think. It starts with an organization having no evidence that they even need to be, there's no evidence that they're doing any of this, and they don't even seem to be aware that they should be. And it goes up from there to knowing they should but still not doing anything, to maybe having some policies but they're not really enforced, not supported by management. There's no active support of the program, all the way up to a mature program where they have regularly updated policies and procedures. It's fully supported by management. It's implemented across the organization, and users are well aware of their obligation. This is what one of the scoring tabs would look like. So you would come in and complete these two columns with the score for each of the items here, and it creates an average overall, obviously. And again, this is just my idea, and I'm no genius, so you may have a better one, and that's okay. My point is to just get you start thinking about it as something that you might want to try to build an objective framework around, so that you can evaluate your program and demonstrate that objectivity to your management, and again be able to fall back on industry standards for that. Here's the bottom half of that sheet, and down here, of course, as you might expect, it averages up everything. So here, this organization, and I just completely made these numbers up, happens to be doing a little bit better on paper records under policies and procedures than electronic. Not uncommon if it's an older organization. They probably had an older traditional records management program that included where there was maybe a file room and that sort of thing, with the big lateral shelf files or whatever. That's probably been around a while and well established and just sort of a cultural part of the organization, while managing electronic content as records is still something that some organizations are a little bit behind. Here's scoring for program structure. And again, it's similar. It starts out at the level of there's no evidence that they're doing anything, and they don't seem to be aware. I sort of went back and forth a little about which should be 1 and 0. 1 currently says they're kind of aware but still not doing anything, and for 0, it's sort of like you don't know what you don't know. If you don't know you should be doing it, then you just don't know that. But if you know and aren't, that's to me almost worse than just not knowing. So, but I decided to stick with this scheme sort of consistently throughout. And I'm not going to read all these to you. We are also making the slide deck available, as well as the spreadsheet that this is kind of taking this from. Again, scoring for a scoring methodology for each of the tabs that you saw down there, each of the color-coded tabs. And this is, program effectiveness for the active program and the inactive programs, and then, of course, scoring for monitoring and training. Right now, at this point, I'm going to pause the sharing for just a minute here, and I'm going to switch over to the Excel spreadsheet, the actual live spreadsheet, and we'll take a look at that from sort of start and finish. As you can see here, there are in some of the fields, some of the cells, there's a crosshatch. Simply means that particular cell wouldn't apply to either analog or electronic records, and so you wouldn't put a score in there. But again, we can go right across. But here's where it gets a little bit more interesting, I think. So if you remember the three different documents that we are operating from, the ISO standard. So here is that broken down by the criteria, and we carry over the scores for each of those to that. So you can see how you performed against that particular standard. And then again, the maturity levels calculated for the principals, the maturity model, and then the self-evaluation was simply a yes/no kind of answer. So I have it saying no if the score is 0 to 2, and if the score is 3 to 5, it gets checked yes. But again, you can see how the organization is doing against each of those. And then we provide a summary dashboard where it sort of all comes together. And you can see here, here's one of the ISO criteria, and then here's each of the other criteria under it and how the organization scored. So again, we sort of keep building this. And then, you know, when you need to make a management presentation, there's nothing like a table or a graph that kind of summarizes what you're talking about. People tend to get visuals much more easily, so we created some of those. And so you can see here we show the scores by the 7 criteria, and then we show again a graph showing electronic records and analog records. Here you can see there's for this one, for inactive program effectiveness, there's pretty stark difference in the two. So once again, the idea here is not to tell you that this is absolutely the way to do it. This is one way to do it, and I'm willing to share that with you. And you can take it and use it as it is, or not use it at all and come up with something on your own, or change this one to suit your needs better. But in any case, again, I keep harping on this. The idea is to encourage you to develop some way to create an evaluation of your records program that is repeatable, objective, consistent, and able to be and that allows you to back that up with the industry standards. Again, I think it's just always an easier, much easier sell to management when you can do that. So we're going to flip back here to our presentation, I guess. All right, so again, as we mentioned, this is a two-parter. Part 2 will come on May the 7th, and you'll get more details. I believe the time was 1 p.m. for that. And if you would like a copy of the spreadsheet and the slides, please feel free to contact me directly at the information here on this slide through email or LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to get that out to you. Also, be on the lookout for the login information for Part 2. And I'm going to take a minute and just add in the thanks that came from Craig Lau, the president of the AIIM chapter at the end, who acknowledged the board of directors who were there and who had worked very hard for this, to get this series of webinars going, as obviously the in-person meetings aren't possible right now while we all kind of work through the stay-at-home orders and all. Hopefully we'll be able to get together in the not too distant future in person. But I do know that the local AIIM board's working hard to put together a series of online events to keep everybody engaged and let you come out of this prepared to hit the ground running when you get back into your organizations. And I appreciate being invited to make this presentation to you. I guess I should have introduced myself a little bit. I've got about 30 plus years in the industry, and my involvement in AIIM goes all the way back to the days when it was the National Micrographics Association, NMA. So I've been around a while. And have worked again for a local city government as a records manager, and then I've consulted with the Wake Forest Medical School over the years, along with some large commercial organizations as well as some large federal agencies, and that's been a lot of fun. And so I look forward to May the 7th and doing part 2 for you. There is homework for that. And what I would like for you to do is think about your organization. Again, what comes out of this evaluation should be some action items. In other words, some things that you want to do to improve the performance of your program in areas where you think you're deficient or where this evaluation shows you to be deficient. We'll take those, and don't worry, send them to me as you think of them, and I won't identify anybody or their organization, but we'll use those and we'll create a mapping to the criteria in order to build a prioritized list of projects that someone could work from. So that's part of the May 7th program. So please send me those as you think of them, and contact me or Craig if you have any questions, or we can be of any help to you. So thank you very much.